Welcome to this deep dive, and today we're going to be tackling USAID.
USAID.
Yeah, this organization everyone's been talking about.
Right.
And we've got a whole bunch of sources here. We've got news articles, we've got some legal documents, even some podcast clips.
Wow.
Um, and things are not looking good for this global aid giant.
Yeah.
There are accusations flying around about mismanagement, weird spending, and even whispers of something called Project Mockingbird, which sounds like a conspiracy theorist's dream come true.
Yeah, it's certainly raising eyebrows. I mean, USAID has a long history,
Yeah.
but these accusations are really hitting at its core mission, helping people.
Right.
And what we're going to try to do today is just kind of sift through all this noise and figure out what's really going on.
Okay, so let's start with the funding freeze.
Okay.
The Trump administration basically just slammed on the brakes, put a 90-day freeze on USAID's budget and said, it's time to cut the fat. We need to get rid of these wasteful programs. But from what I've been reading, this has caused absolute chaos.
Yeah, the fallout has been huge. You're talking thousands of USAID employees and contractors are suddenly out of work.
Oh, wow.
Aid programs around the world are being halted or scaled back. And it's gotten so messy that there are now lawsuits claiming that the administration doesn't even have the authority to do this.
Wow, so people are literally losing their jobs because of this.
Yeah, it's like a human drama unfolding in the middle of this bureaucratic war.
Yeah.
And it's kind of ironic, right? Because USI is supposed to be helping people, but this freeze is hurting the very people who work for USAID.
Right. Yeah, it's like the system is working against itself.
Exactly.
And then to make things even crazier, there's this group called DOGE, and they're auditing USAID, and what they're finding is blowing the lid off of this whole thing.
Yeah, DOGE is claiming that they've uncovered evidence of serious mismanagement.
Okay.
For example, one of their reports highlighted a USAID-funded program in Pakistan focused on gender studies. The stated goal was to promote women's rights and equality. But DOGE says the program was poorly managed and ultimately ineffective. Now, USAID, of course, is pushing back against this. They're saying that DOGE is cherry-picking examples
Right.
and ignoring the program's positive impacts, but it's definitely a point of contention.
So DOGE is basically saying that USAID is throwing money at these projects without making sure that they're actually working.
That's one of their main arguments. They also claim to have found evidence of questionable spending practices.
Yeah.
We're talking about things like potential conflicts of interest, contracts awarded without competitive bidding, all these things that really raise red flags about how USAID is managing its budget.
Okay, and how is the media reacting to all of this?
It's a complete media circus.
Yeah.
Conservative outlets are having a field day, right? They're holding up DOGE's findings as proof that USAID is corrupt and needs a major overhaul. I even saw this clip from the Rubin Report where they were talking about how Caroline Leavitt, at the White House press secretary, presented these DOGE findings to the press. And apparently there were audible gasps in the room when she revealed some of these USAID expenditures.
Wait, hold on. Gasps. Like they were actually shocked.
Yeah.
What kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about this USAID-funded art installation in Europe.
Okay.
Conservative commentators are saying it's a prime example of wasteful spending, while USI defends it as a cultural diplomacy initiative.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying, this strengthens relationships with European countries.
Right.
But, yeah, it definitely raised some eyebrows.
So on the one hand, you've got people saying USAID is wasting taxpayer money on these frivolous projects. And then on the other hand, you've got USAID defending these programs as being, essential.
Yeah, it's a classic clash of perspectives.
Right.
And right in the middle of all of this, we have Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah. What's his take on this whole thing? Because he's been pretty vocal about government waste in the past.
He has. He's been a strong supporter of this funding freeze, and he's even called for deeper cuts to USI.
Wow.
He's arguing that the agency is bloated and inefficient, and that taxpayer money would be better spent elsewhere.
So he's essentially siding with DOGE then. He's saying that these questionable expenditures, like that art installation we were just talking about, are proof that USA needs to be reined in.
That's his position, yeah. And his voice carries a lot of weight, so his involvement has definitely added fuel to the fire. It's turned this whole USAID situation into a political football.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit more. How are the different political sides reacting to all of this?
Well, by and large, Democrats are condemning the freeze. They're saying it's politically motivated and will ultimately harm vulnerable communities that rely on these USAID programs.
Right.
They see it as a vital tool for promoting American values and interests abroad. Republicans, on the other hand, are largely in favor of cutting government spending and holding agencies like USAID accountable. They see the freeze as a necessary step to address the waste and mismanagement that DOGE has uncovered.
So it's basically a classic partisan divide.
Hmm.
Democrats see USAID as essential. Republicans see it as a bloated bureaucracy.
That's the general trend, yeah.
Yeah,
And it makes this whole situation even more difficult to navigate.
right,
Because who do you trust?
right.
Who's telling the truth? It's hard to say.
Yeah, and especially when you've got somebody like Elon Musk jumping in and saying, yeah, cut it all. Like, is
Exactly.
he doing it for, good reasons? Is he doing it for his own reasons? We don't know.
Right.
It's hard to say. It's like everyone's got their own agenda here, and it's kind of hard to see what the truth is.
Right.
But let's try to just focus on the facts for a second.
Okay.
DOGE is making some pretty serious allegations.
Yeah.
What else are they saying besides just this mismanagement stuff?
Well, one of the more explosive claims is about potential conflicts of interest within USAID.
Okay.
DOGE suggests that some USAID officials may have personal or financial ties to organizations that are actually receiving this funding.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big accusation, and they're calling for more transparency in the selection process for these partner organizations.
Wait, so they're saying that people within USA might be like directing money to groups that benefit them personally?
That's essentially what they're suggesting.
That's pretty shady.
Yeah, it raises serious questions about accountability.
Right.
And this is exactly the kind of thing that people like Elon Musk are seizing on.
Right.
He's been saying for years that government agencies need a serious cleanup.
Yeah.
And this seems to be playing right into his narrative.
Right. It sounds like this whole thing is feeding into like a broader distrust of government institutions.
Absolutely. There's a definite sense of skepticism out there. I was listening to Donald Trump Jr.'s podcast, Triggered,
Okay.
and he had this guy, Mike Benz, on as a guest. And Benz was really going after USAID. He was comparing it to this giant Truman Show
Oh, wow.
where everything looks perfect on the surface.
Right.
But behind the scenes, there's this hidden agenda.
That's a pretty harsh comparison. But even if that's a little extreme, are there any legitimate concerns about how USAID operates?
Absolutely. I think the biggest question is whether USAID has enough oversight.
Okay.
Are they truly evaluating the effectiveness of their programs? Are they being transparent about how they spend taxpayer money? These are valid concerns regardless of anyone's political stance.
Okay, and what about those legal challenges that we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Where do those stand?
Well, the main argument against this funding freeze is that the administration overstepped its boundaries.
Yeah.
Critics are saying that Congress controls the purse strings
Right.
and that the president can't just unilaterally decide to halt funding for an agency.
So they're basically saying that the president is acting like a king, just making decisions without any checks and balances.
Essentially, yeah. But the administration is firing back, saying that they have the authority to manage federal spending and that this freeze is necessary to rein in what they're calling a runaway bureaucracy.
So it's a power struggle between the executive and legislative branches, with USAID caught in the crossfire.
It's a political showdown. And as usual, it's hard to separate fact from spin.
Right.
Both sides are accusing each other of playing politics with crucial aid programs, while the media is just amplifying the drama.
Speaking of the media, I've noticed there's a huge difference in how conservative and mainstream outlets are covering this.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
Like, it seems like they're almost reporting on completely different stories.
Well, conservative media is really focusing on these DOGE findings,
Right.
highlighting the most sensational accusations, and painting USAID as a deeply flawed organization.
Okay.
I was watching Louder with Crowder, and Steven Crowder did a whole segment where he basically accused the mainstream media of covering up the truth about USA.
So they're pushing the narrative that USAID is corrupt and the mainstream media is complicit in hiding it.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have mainstream outlets who are mostly criticizing the funding freeze and questioning the validity of this DOGE audit. They're accusing the administration of using DOGE as a political weapon to dismantle USAID and advance their own agenda.
It sounds like we're in a full-blown information war here.
It
Is
is.
everyone pushing their own version of reality?
It can be overwhelming for sure.
Yeah.
But amidst all this noise, it's crucial to remember that real people are being impacted by this.
That's right. We were talking about the USAID employees who are losing their jobs.
Right.
But what about the people in these other countries all over the world who rely on these programs for food, healthcare, education? What happens to them when the funding disappears?
Yeah, that's the heartbreaking part of this whole situation. We've seen reports of essential services being cut back or even eliminated in some regions. There are families struggling to put food on the table, communities losing access to clean water, healthcare systems being stretched to the breaking point.
And these are all like unintended consequences of this political maneuvering.
It's a stark reminder that decisions made in Washington have real-world consequences,
Right.
often for the most vulnerable populations.
Wow. This has definitely taken a darker turn. I almost feel guilty for getting caught up in the political drama when there's so much at stake for so many people.
It's a natural reaction,
Yeah.
but it's also why it's so important to understand the complexities of this situation.
Right.
The USAID story is not just about political battles or bureaucratic infighting. It's about real human lives hanging the balance.
You're right. It's easy to get lost in the headlines and forget about the human cost. But we need to keep those stories in mind as we try to navigate this really complex issue.
Absolutely. And speaking of complex, we still have DOGE's most unsettling claim to unpack, the allegations about Project Mockingbird.
Okay, yeah, that's the one that really has me intrigued. Give us the rundown. What exactly was Project Mockingbird?
Well, it was this alleged CIA operation during the Cold War.
Okay.
And the theory is that the CIA secretly used journalists and media outlets to spread propaganda and influence public opinion. It's never been officially confirmed, but it's a popular topic among conspiracy theorists and people who generally distrust the government. And now DOGE is implying that USI might be involved in something similar today.
Wait, so they're seriously saying that USI is like secretly funding media outlets to spread propaganda?
They haven't presented concrete evidence yet,
Okay.
but they've hinted at financial ties between USAID and certain media organizations.
Hold on. I remember seeing a clip from the Jimmy Dore show,
Right.
and they were talking about this DOGE report about USAID grants going to organizations that then fund media projects.
That's right. And it's important to remember that USAID does have a history of funding media development programs in other countries.
Right.
They claim it's part of their mission to promote democracy and a free press.
Okay.
But the line between legitimate media support and covert propaganda can be blurry. It's not always so clear-cut.
Okay, so maybe there's a legitimate explanation for some of this, but even just the suspicion of USI being involved in something like Project Mockingbird, that's pretty damaging, right?
It is, absolutely. It raises serious questions about their transparency and their motives. And if DOGE's allegations turn out to be true, it would be a major scandal with far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, this is some seriously heavy stuff. We're talking about like the potential manipulation of information on a global scale.
It's a reminder of how vulnerable we are to disinformation,
Right.
especially in the age of social media.
Right.
And it makes the role of independent media, like this podcast, even more critical.
Yeah, we need to be the watchdogs, holding powerful institutions accountable and providing our listeners with accurate, unbiased information.
Exactly.
But we also need to be careful not to get caught up in like the hype and hysteria.
That's right. We need to approach this with a critical eye,
Right.
examine the evidence carefully, and avoid hasty judgments.
So let's jump back into this Project Mockingbird thing.
All right.
You said DOGE hasn't like released any hard proof yet, but they're hinting at USAID being linked to media manipulation.
Right.
What kind of hints are we talking about?
Well, they've released these snippets of information, things like USI grants going to organizations that then fund media projects.
Okay.
It's all pretty circumstantial right now. But DOGE is framing it as this deliberate attempt to blur the lines between aid and propaganda.
So they're suggesting that USI is like funneling money to media outlets without being transparent about it. If that's true, how could they even get away with that?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
DOGE claims that USAID is exploiting loopholes and using all these layers of intermediaries to obscure the flow of money.
Okay.
They're basically accusing USAI of creating this system where it's very difficult to track where the funding's going and what it's being used for.
That's sneaky, to say the least.
Yeah.
But hold on.
Yeah.
Isn't it possible that some of these media projects are legitimate?
Sure.
Like USAID does fund media development programs in other countries, right?
They do. That's right. And they argue that supporting independent media is essential for promoting democracy and free speech. However, DOGE contends that some of these programs go beyond just providing training and resources.
Right.
They're claiming that USAID is actually influencing the content that's being produced, pushing this pro-U.S. agenda under the guise of media development.
Okay, so even if USAID started with good intentions, like we want to support a free press, DOGE is saying they've crossed a line into manipulating the media.
That's the crux of their argument, yeah. And to be fair, it's a valid concern.
Right.
Even if we give USAID the benefit of the doubt, there's a slippery slope here, right?
Right.
When a government agency starts funding media outlets, it inevitably raises questions about bias and influence.
It's like, where do you draw the line? At what point does media development become propaganda? This whole thing feels like a giant ethical gray area.
It's murky territory for sure.
Yeah.
And it gets even more complicated when you consider the political context.
Right.
Remember, this whole USAID controversy is happening at a time when trust in institutions is already low.
Yeah.
People are very skeptical of anything coming from the government.
Right. It feels like everyone's accusing everyone else of like lying and manipulating information. And it's exhausting to try to figure out who to believe.
Yeah, it's the age of information overload and disinformation.
Right.
And that's why it's more important than ever to be critical thinkers.
Right.
Don't just blindly accept what you read or hear, especially when it's coming from sources that have a very clear agenda.
It's like we have to become our own fact checkers and analysts these days.
In a way, yeah. We need to be aware of the biases of different media outlets. We need to look for evidence to support the claims that are being made.
Right.
And just be willing to consider multiple perspectives. It's not easy, but it's essential if we want to navigate this incredibly complex information landscape.
So if we try to step back from the immediate drama, like what does this whole USAID saga tell us about the bigger picture? What does it say about America's role in the world?
Well, it's forcing us to confront some uncomfortable truths about foreign aid, right?
Right.
Is it truly about helping other countries, or is it just another tool for advancing U.S. interests? And if it's the latter, is that necessarily a bad thing? These are tough questions.
Yeah, and I don't think there are easy answers,
There aren't.
to any of this.
No. But these are conversations that we need to be having. The USAID controversy is really a symptom of a much larger debate about the role of America in the 21st century, right? What are our responsibilities to the rest of the world? How do we balance our own national interests with the needs of other nations?
It feels like the whole world is in a state of flux right now. Like old alliances are shifting, new powers are emerging, and it's like the rules of the game are changing.
Yeah, and in this very uncertain landscape, organizations like USAID are caught in the crosshairs.
Right.
They're trying to navigate this complex web of political, economic, and humanitarian challenges, and it's not always clear what the right path forward is.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. We went from a funding freeze to allegations of mismanagement to this Project Mockingbird mystery. It's like every twist and turn reveals another layer of complexity.
And that's the nature of these kinds of deep dives, right?
Right.
We start with what seems like a very simple question. What's going on with USAID?
Yeah.
And we end up exploring this whole tangle of issues that touch on the very foundations of our globalized world.
So where do we go from here? What should our listeners be watching for as this story continues to unfold?
Well, keep your eyes peeled for any concrete evidence that DOGE releases to support their claims.
Okay.
Pay attention to how these legal challenges against the funding freeze play out.
Right.
And most importantly, stay engaged in the conversation.
Right.
Don't just be a passive consumer of information. Be critical, be curious, and be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Yeah, this USAID story is a reminder that the truth is often elusive, especially in a world that's so saturated with information and misinformation.
It is.
It's up to each of us to sift through the noise, find the signal, and form our own informed opinions.
Well said.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dives, but the conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds sharp.
Absolutely.
Until next time, happy diving.